I'm here as the Chief Executive of Genius Boards. Welcome to see so many people have joined us today. This is going to be an extremely interesting webinar. It's going to be in conversation throughout, where Charlotte and I find it much easier just to chat to one another, because then you get to see the person, not the presentation. So we're going to be talking, and we're going to cover initially some of sort of the science, a little bit about I use the word science, I'm not going into the science, but more about the technical aspects of neurodiversity. We're then going to talk about it from a personal perspective, from a boardroom and a leadership and a business perspective. And then we're going to have a look at how colleagues can manage with it best. And then having a look at what is Charlotte doing today to actually bring up this awareness, which she's achieving very successfully. But what we'd like to hear is more about exactly how and what she is doing in this process. So Charlotte, welcome to my panel that has now got audio in all aspects and has got visual in all aspects. And welcome to our team who are with us today. Thank you very much. Charlotte, you're an extremely interesting person. I've got to know you through a number of different channels. The one that sort of really is resonating with me is the work you're doing in boardroom diversity, boardroom competence, and board leadership. These are all very, very passionate areas of mine, and I find it's really important that we do address them and make sure that we are doing the best for the companies that we represent in every respect. So maybe the first way to sort of break the ice is please introduce yourself in the way you'd like to be, other than I know you as IOD chair at a point in time when I first met you, and now you've got your own business, Global Governance Group, and I know you've probably got one or two other titles. If you'd like to introduce yourself and then go straight into, talk to us a bit about what is neurodiversity. People are going to say, and so what's that? So before we confuse anybody any further, maybe we start there.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me here. And I hope you can all hear me now in a good way. Thank you. So I'm Charlotte Valeur. I'm Danish of origin, hence the accent that I still carry. I've been in the UK for 30 years. I've worked in the finance industry for 40 years. This year has been my 40-year anniversary, which is a bit scary and shows off my age, but there you are. I started in banking at 18 as an apprentice and had a successful career throughout that, within 4 years working as a stock exchange trader, moving to London from Denmark and finishing working in the city when I had my first child, set up my own business, and now serve on a number of boards. Governance has become my special interest, if you want, and that's what I have focused on for the last 17 to 18 years. So neurodiversity was something that I've been looking at for a number of years. We have a lot of what we call neurodivergent people in my family. So neurodiversity is really the neurotype natural diversity that exists within humankind. We have different ways of thinking, different ways of being, and I think we all know that to be the fact. But over years, we have called that all kinds of different things, and a lot of it has been portrayed as disabilities or disadvantages, or people should be in institutions instead of in the broader group of human beings. So within neurodivergence, which is a different neurotypes to what we call the typical type or neurotypicals, which is what we see as the sort of mainstream normative way of thinking. Under that comes things like autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, Tourette's, all the kind of different interesting and less interesting labels that has been put on these kind of things over the years. I have neurodivergent children as well. And as I went along with working with them on things and specialists through diagnostics and this, I saw a lot of similarities. And in the end, I thought it might be a good idea for myself to look at whether I am a different neurotype. And I've come to realize that I am both autistic and ADHD, having gone through full diagnostics with a clinical psychologist and hundreds of questions and all kind of interesting things. As you need to go through this. Any diagnostics are looked with a medical eye, but we look at it with the overlay of neurodiversity in that we are simply different neurotypes. And some of us have additional disabilities and difficulties in different areas, and some of us don't. We simply have different ways of thinking, which in the sort of social model of disability can feel like a disability because we have a broader sensory band. Generally, it seems. I would call it more developed. Some people like to call it less developed or call it a disability. For me, when you see, hear, smell, taste, feel more, it means that you're much more in tune with everything that goes on around you. And I think a lot of neurodivergent people could easily be used as sort of guiding lights in this kind of way because we have a much broader sensory band. So that's basically, neurodiversity is the natural occurring neuro differences within humankind, in short.
And thank you for describing it in that way, because you don't want to say that that is a negative aspect, because we are going to disprove that in this next hour. And it's nice to start very clearly, is that we are, when you look at people with the range from IQ to EQ, how varied that can be in one boardroom, and they might not fit onto the scale you're discussing at all, and you've still got a massive divergence. One of the things you mentioned now about sensory, and I've done a little bit of research, minor amount of research ahead of this meeting, where I picked up there also things like photographic memory, very good attention to detail, ability to recall facts from ages ago. So that attention to a degree of detail that others might find a lot more challenging to achieve. So the question I ask, there's just a few differences that between us we've shared. How does the person feel different? What is it that differentiates you or makes you feel you don't fit in, or you do fit in, but everyone else is not fitting in?
Yeah.
Is there a difference there, or is there not?
So what's quite interesting is that it's, I think everybody feels when someone is different to themselves. And I think all human beings have a level of xenophobia or fear of differences. Everyone seems more comfortable with that tribe that seems to be like them. And it's easy to communicate, it's easy to agree, it's easy to do a lot of things. But when you meet someone who is different to you, it becomes more difficult, and it can feel sort of uncomfortable that someone is different, down to the level that as human beings, hundreds of years ago, we decided that people from Africa were so different that we couldn't enslave them and kill them and beat them and so forth. And the same happens to neurodivergent people at times. I mean, I was relentlessly bullied as a child for reasons I never understood. I was virtually non-speaking till I was 12. Being silent was a much safer place to be in. I have 3 siblings. They never got bullied. I was the only one of the 4 of us. And within the family, I always felt a certain difference, where my 3 siblings seem to be similar and get along in a very easy way, where I always felt sort of on the outside. So even in my own family, it was like you have a family circle and you're on the outside. And in all circles, in school, at work, and this, it was always this throughout. I'm also very, very comfortable in my own company, so I don't mind not being in. I mean, the popular girls circle and this, I was never there, never in any of that, not even near it. I just kept myself to myself. I did think maybe I was adopted or had a different father or something like that, but none of that is the case. The case is just that I was different. After my father has passed, his sister actually said that she believes that he was autistic too, because he was always very different. There were also 4 siblings. As a child, he was very different. As an adult, he was quite quirky. Very quirky, but I thought that was funny, and we all thought that was kind of funny, but maybe it was something else. We just didn't think about it in that way. So I think there is a feeling, and I hear it from many neurodivergent people, that they feel like an alien landed on Earth, that they don't understand other people, that they can't go in and just naturally be part of a group. Because we have certain tendencies that seem to go across a lot of the neurotypes that are divergent from the norm, is that we're quite direct, quite blunt, quite honest. Some would say brutally honest, but for us, that's the only one kind of honest. It's like, so I never ask my neurodivergent son if my bum looks this big in this dress, because he will definitely say, oh yes, mom, it definitely does, so don't wear that. So, don't ask if you don't want to hear the truth. But that seems to be something not well understood in the broader group of humanity, because they like to ask your opinion, but they don't really want it. So this is just making things more complicated for us, right? Because the whole lying is really when you want to manipulate someone else to think something different to what they think. And for us, it just doesn't make any logical sense either, because in the end of the day, the truth always comes out one way or the other. Well, mostly, because it's like, for me, children lie, but adults shouldn't really have to. Can you not stand by yourself and who you are and what you think? And why do you have to pretend things are different than they actually are? For me, that's just kind of a bit nonsense.
It's a waste of time.
Well, yeah, but that's how I see it. But some people live by it, right? So I think those are some of the ways where we automatically feel very, very different. And of course, if we have other difficulties in addition to being a different neurotype, so if we need mental health care, they wouldn't understand our reaction to our difficulties. So we could have much bigger reactions because of our sensory band, which is again is wider than the neurotypical ways. And that makes us react stronger to noises and lights and discomfort and touches and stuff like that. So the whole look into my eyes business, for a lot of us, when we look deeply into people's eyes, it almost gives us like electrical shock inside. We feel that person very intensely when we look into the eyes. So unless we have a good reason to feel that person in such a personal way, it's nicer to not look in. So I would tend to look, you know, here or here or here, but not. And so if you say to people, are you interested in knowing why I'm not so comfortable looking into people's eyes? But nobody has even considered that. No research done on it. Nobody is that interested. People are just interested in making us do what the normative way is. And that's what we sort of are not super crazy about, because it just means that we have to be something we're not naturally. But if you're very comfortable with someone, then there's not a problem looking into someone's eyes because there's no risk in it.
Correct. And interesting, we see in different cultures, you look in somebody's eye, you don't look in somebody's eye.
That's right.
You do touch them, you don't touch them. They're blunt as a nation or they're not blunt as a nation.
Yeah.
So we also get it across cultural aspects, and then you have the human aspect that's layered underneath that.
That's right.
And the one thing I wanted to ask, and this just goes back to a personal experience I had the other day, as to are there degrees of, and I assume there probably is, but where do the people succeed in business on that scale of yes, slightly to hugely? Because I saw a circumstance at an airport the other day where approximately a 12-year-old girl, very pretty, was wreaking mayhem. Absolute and utter mayhem, getting past security controls, trying to get out onto the apron of the airport. It really was a very difficult and very sort of disturbing space. And the security suddenly arrived, and the mum said, I'm doing my best, she's autistic, please help me. Yeah. And all of a sudden the tone changed. Everybody's tone changed, and everybody showed a respect for the lady. But this woman, this little girl was, I mean, on the plane, she was trying to open the cockpit door, and it was really hard. So how is somebody like her going to cope in life later? Or is it going to be something that balances out? I just felt so much for the mum and the child.
I know, and it's extremely difficult because us as children can get overwhelmed very easily.
Right.
Normal children can't get overwhelmed very easily. It's just that our overwhelm is bigger.
Right.
So if you think of it in terms of sensory overload, taking autistic children traveling through security, through all of these kind of things, I mean, it's stressful for all of us. So if your sensitivity to stress is 5 or 10 times higher than it is for neurotypicals, you can imagine if you feel stressed when you go through all this, what would it feel for you if it was 10 times more stressful? What would you do? You would probably lay on the floor screaming, because that's what we would all do. So the whole society, we sort of say, is set up for neurotypicals, which is a neurotypical privilege, is that neurotypicals live in a society that works for them, but it doesn't work for a very large group of other people that are different neurotypes. And we think we're anywhere between 20 and 40% of the world population when you put all of us together. So it's significant. It's not small, it's billions.
No,
But
I've come across many.
We've never had a voice because people believed that we were not able to speak and we're not able to explain and we were not very intelligent. There's all kind of narrative around us that is not true, and it's slowly changing. So for me, the best method, obviously, when you do travel and you are very highly sensitive, especially when you're a child and you haven't learned to regulate your emotions yet, this happens. So this is why I think there is this idea that we get cured as we get older. So people say to me, oh, but you must be mildly autistic. I was like, yeah, out of 50 traits, I have 42. I'm not sure that's very mildly autistic. And there isn't really any such, you either are, you're not. And then people go say, oh, we're all a bit autistic. Well, we also all have headaches, but we don't all have migraine. Although they're both headaches, it's not quite the same. So out of 50 traits, the average neurotypical has 15, and the average autistic person has 35. So that's a variation. Yes, everybody has some of the traits that's coming up as autistic traits. It's just we have them more intensely. So as we grow up, we learn to understand the world around us better, depending on what trauma we have experienced as children. Because the problem for us is that we have discrimination in the sense against us from cradle to grave. As soon as we're born, we get treated by people that are not our neurotype, unless we have neurodivergent parents that intuitively understand what works for us. So for example, in my house, it has always been very soft colors, except the paintings, which we can choose to have or not. It's been quiet, it's been calm, I don't shout, these kind of things. It's just so my 3 children could live in that environment easily. But when they came out of it and into schools and this, there were more challenges, of course, because that's not set up in that way. So I think it's all about the environment that we are in. But some of us have additional disabilities. We have, some of us have mental disabilities, physical disabilities, and trauma, just as what you find in the neurotypical world. You find people with disabilities. It's exactly the same as that, exactly. Just overlaid with a different neurotype. And that's what people don't understand. It's not so they're trying to talk about profoundly autistic, for example. So autism is just one of the neurodivergences. Profoundly autistic is literally like, if you're nonverbal, it's not just autistic people that are nonverbal, there are non-autistic people that are nonverbal too. It's a separate neurological issue that comes and that often comes with also finding it difficult to move your arms in the way. So communication is very difficult, but a lot of nonverbal people are incredibly intelligent and have a huge inner world that struggles to come out until we've worked enough to try to find a way of typing or something to get that out. And it's not well recognized. Mostly they get treated as not able in any way when they are super able. We just need to find a way to unlock their talents.
And this is something we've all learned a lot more about in the recent years, and your pioneering has helped me learn a lot more as well. And I have come across it in business to varying degrees. But before I talk about the one particular board that I did engage it on, and I want to just share it with you, I just wanted to find out, in your early banking years, how did your intelligence, ability, and disability, you kept talking about we, so you probably don't fall into any of the disability characteristics, but with your neurodiversity, in what way might it have been a positive for you? Because I look to say, well, what you've done very well in your career. So how did you harness value out of who you are to get to where you have?
So I think some of my natural strengths, which is a degree of photographic memory, hyperfocus, very fast reading and taking things in, very autodidact and everything, has helped me a lot in just pushing ahead. But the ADHD have probably been the like driving factor in I can't stop driving towards new goals and new things. And I think the combination actually, autistic and people with ADHD overlaps by 70 to 80%. We almost always have both, like, so it's significant overlap, so much so that should we discuss whether it's one part of the same thing or not. But when I got diagnosed autistic 6 years ago, I found out 8 years ago, and I thought, gosh, I had to think about it for a couple of years before I moved on with anything more than that, because I really was quite surprised. And then I thought, okay, so I got this now, re-looked at my entire life, and then thought something's still not right. I have this mind that doesn't stand still. I can't not think all the time. It's never just blank. There's no off button. So there's this constant filming of whatever going on inside. And that's very typical of ADHD. And also the hyper focus, when I really go into something, I'm deeply in it for a long time. So that's also, so there are separate pieces that they put into the different groups. And I think that helped me being very focused. As soon as I started work and I liked it, I was very focused on it. I didn't think of very much else. Other than dog training, because I had a Rottweiler when I was very young. And so I set up a dog club on the side of working. And because I can't do anything in small measures, it just has to be something like crazy. that, well, not crazy, just like significant, that makes a difference. That's how my mind drives me. So that's definitely an advantage. But I can also think back of times when I was in the network of a bank, and with that I can be a bit of a perfectionist. With many things I can be a bit of a perfectionist, but those are work-wise. Every week we had a morning meeting once a week, and I would literally have a list of things of telling all my colleagues what they should and shouldn't do. It must have been so irritating, like so irritating. I was there like 19 years old thinking I was a big fish or something. I don't know, but I didn't have that sort of filter that made me sit back and think they probably don't want to listen to me. But and they allowed me, and I think Denmark is a more forgiving country to be in as well in that way. Apparently it's one of the best countries in the world to be autistic, alongside Japan. And I think partly that's because of the cultures and how they work with it somehow works with our neurotypes better. Yeah. So it has definitely been strengthened when I became a stock exchange trader. The speed of everything, loved it. Yeah. A room full of people from all over the world in London, dealing rooms, loved it. None of us judged. I could just be me. I was just one foreigner among many foreigners. And when I left Denmark in my mid-20s, living in a country where people know I'm a foreigner and therefore don't have specific expectations of me, perfect. When I overstep with something, I say, oh, that's what we do in Denmark. And people go, okay. So the cultural aspect, people understand. So what I would like to have is culture alongside neurotypes, and that we can look at neurotypes in the same way as culture. Thank you very much for bringing this. Yeah, because that's absolutely really it's not too dissimilar.
Yep, exactly. Referring back to the chairman I mentioned a moment ago, who was, I wouldn't know where on the spectrum, but seriously on it in some way or another. He was really quite a difficult individual to work with. But what we did is we worked with the CEO and the exec team to identify through experience what his red buttons were. And once we had identified what the first key three were, you could at least take 80% of the reactions out of the world if you didn't press the button.
Yes.
Yes. And we got to quite a good place for a couple of years. CEO resigned, and the number two came in, who was very much a testosterone. I'm in my seat. This is my business. I'm doing it my way. And oh my goodness me, did things go wrong again very quickly. I wasn't involved, so I don't know what they did. How would you advise somebody who is working with or working for or working as part of a team where somebody is very difficult to work with, but brings the value of absolute detail, absolute memory, unbelievable drive, incredible vision for the business? He brought so much, but his behavior was appalling if you found that red button.
Yeah. And those kind of people can always be super difficult. I think sometimes we have to look at the talent and the value that people bring. I've worked with a number of people that I would classify as sort of corporate psychopaths. I know that sounds a bit strong. You can Google it. There's a paper out of it from Oxford Law that they wrote up that actually originated from New Zealand, I believe, and then went through Oxford Law. And the description of that is basically someone who's very toxic. So there is quite a significant difference between being, for example, autistic or toxic. So toxic is where you put people down, you humiliate people, you name call, you undermine them, you gaslight them, all of those kind of lovely things that toxic people do. But then there's the ones that are very direct, maybe talk over you, but they're never humiliating you. Do you see the difference?
Yes,
There's
I do. Absolutely.
Between someone who's out to get you and take you down, right, and someone who's simply focused on getting the right thing done.
Yeah.
So some people would categorize me as being difficult to work with. I've heard that. I mean, I've interviewed with a board that said, I scared the life out of the board members. I don't even know what that means, but apparently I scared the life out of the board members. And I still to the day, don't know how, but nevertheless, something about me made them very concerned. Sometimes in the dealing room, people were concerned, literally with 300 people and 2 women, and I was one of them. But
you
the traders
already.
Well, the traders nevertheless found me scary. And I don't understand this word scary. So when I talk to my children, for example, one day I said to my middle son, maybe I should, be like a house mother in a boarding house. And he's like, look, Mom, you just can't do that. You're just too soft. You're just too soft. You can never deal with these children. And I was like, okay, Oscar, that's interesting. And that's grown men that say they're scared of me. And Oscar just shakes his head and walks away. He's just like, he literally thinks I'm lying. Right, so you see, my children obviously knows me very intimately. I think my daughter even did call me a doormat recently. And I was like, okay, that's not a very nice word. Could we find something else? And because what I want is for them to grow in their own way and to find how to make their own decisions for their own life. So my children today can. So she said the other. She said, I have made great life choices, as you absolutely have, and they are all yours. None of them are mine, because I never told my children what decision to make. They always had a choice, maybe within a framework of what was safe, but they had a choice. And the same in the business. We have choices every day, right? If someone, I've never hit anyone, at home or professionally. That's not actually true. Someone did touched me in a way that was very uncomfortable and did slap him. But he deserves that, except he had glasses and the glasses fell on the floor and someone stepped on them. But that was not me that stepped on them. And I was only 22. And nobody should touch anyone if they don't want to be touched on their bottom. So right, that was fair, I think. But that was also back in the 80s. Today that would have been unacceptable. I just might add, so that nobody goes away and does that. Yeah, I just think that you look at what kind of person you have in front of you.
Yes.
If it's someone who is toxic, or is it someone who is direct and honest, even when it's uncomfortable?
I like the definition you've made around the difference between toxic and neurodiverse, because I think sometimes a lot of people get that one wrong. Yeah. And yes, you do get, I think there's some stats I read out of the US where you have these people that literally will stand on everyone around them to get to the top. Yeah. And they sometimes get labeled in the direction of neurodiversity, and other people label them as not being the nicest people and having another kind of characteristic to their behavior that we wouldn't put in a neurodiverse category. Just looking at
I'm not saying that neurodivergent people can't be toxic at all.
Oh, of course they can.
I haven't met any yet who are, but I have met lots who are direct and honest. Yeah. And that isn't always what people want, even though they say they want it. That just isn't always what people want.
As you know, when you and I do board evaluations, you're doing board governance, and they ask for feedback, and you say you don't look as good as you are. This is what the mirror looks like. Oh, very thin-skinned immediately. So we all know that people don't like actually to get the feedback they've asked for, as you said earlier. The one thing I wanted to ask, we talk about the 5 leadership quotients in life, of which 2 of them is IQ and EQ. And we've clearly talked about the IQ element that neurodiversity brings as a strength.
Yeah.
Where would you say their strength is in the EQ space? You've talked about honesty, you've talked about directness, you've talked about truth to the ears. Yeah. Any other aspects of challenges or positivities that we come in the EQ space as we would understand it in a general business context of the discussion?
Yeah. I think in the EQ space, even in the IQ space, there is a level of the how we measure EQ, IQ is set up against neurotypicals.
Yeah, okay.
Right? So you're now trying to measure the same with people who think differently, which would be as different as people from different cultures. So in some cultures, if you look into someone's eyes who is older than you or have a high position, that is very rude.
Very rude.
Where in another country, if you don't do it, that's also very rude. So how do we think that between neurotypes that we can set one standard for EQ? And also the IQ piece, a lot of us, including myself, were told in school that we are not very smart. Actually, the word dumb came out several times for me.
Wow.
So
I think that's wrong based on you.
I think that's wrong. So my son, my oldest son, but they thought he was gifted when he was 4, when he had taught himself to read. Later on, much later on, at 15, he was diagnosed autistic. But he went to a school to be checked for giftedness, and he wasn't gifted, which is quite spiky, but he was high above average intelligent and everything. So the schools couldn't call him dumb, but I think they would have, had we not had that piece of paper by coincidence that the school had encouraged us to get. So what they said was, yes, he's clearly very intelligent, but we can't teach him anything, and that's his fault. So you see, when you're stuck in this set way of measuring EQ and IQ, which is not set up against ours, where, I mean, what was it? Was it Einstein didn't really come through until he was 37 and failed school? What does that tell us, right?
Yep, exactly.
He was in an environment that wasn't set up for his intellect. And the same goes for all of us. So maybe our EQ is different. We can get upset and feel insulted by different things than neurotypicals would. And neurotypicals can feel insulted by things, and I'm thinking, what was that? Right?
Why?
So therefore we need like interpreters between us in a sense. Because clearly our IQ is not understood, and how we socialize is not understood. So I think I still what they call parallel play. I love having people in my house, but I don't love if I have to talk to them all the time. It's just, but them being in my house makes me feel them. And I feel the togetherness without talking all the time. But I really feel it as opposed to when I'm on my own, I feel that there's nobody there. I don't have to talk to have the feeling of togetherness. And I think that's again the wider sensory band. And therefore, again, that when we are children and we have many people around us, we feel all of those people very intensely, for good and for bad. And we smell them and we hear them and we see them. And that's a lot for a sensory system that's sensitive. So I think the EQ, IQ, I think people so from the neurotypical scale of EQ, and I don't want it to, it's not about neurotypicals against neurodivergence, it just is that the world is neurotypical and it's set up for neurotypical. So that's what we are measured against, even though we are not that. Mm-hmm. So on that scale, a lot of us would be seen as rude because being too honest is rude. Not looking into someone's eye is rude. And it might also show that you're a liar and maybe a thief or whatever else comes with that.
Depending on the culture, yeah.
Well, exactly. So we are here where we are looking at emotional intelligence in a way as measured by one type, but we all get measured by it. So how we behave towards each other, I mean, for us, obviously being bullied and excluded feels quite bad all the way as we grow up, but nobody seemed to see that as emotional misdemeanor. Mm. It's like, okay to exclude us, okay that we are, because there isn't the focus on teaching the people who exclude us that maybe they shouldn't do that. So where are we on emotional intelligence and empathy as well? There's been some, again, misnomer around our empathy. Most of us feel that we have much deeper empathy, so it's deep that we feel it very intensely when someone is hurt or anything happens. So intensely sometimes that we have to pull away a bit just because it's overwhelming. One reason why I never watch television is that there's so much going on there. It's very overwhelming. I just watch the news and I just read the Financial Times. That sounds really dull. For me, that's really good. And I enjoyed reading Winston Churchill's biography when I was 12 because it's real people, it's real life, it's stuff that's happened, much more than reading a princess story of some kind.
Exactly.
Right? Because that is clearly never going to happen, right? So
if you're looking at a requirements to a chair to competently get the best out of every director, they have to look at each and every director as an individual in every respect, whether they are diverse in whatever range or spectrum you want to put them. But there'll be some that like cultural. They've been taught about cultural since they were kids. They knew that Japanese and Germans are different to English. So they've got that already. And they're probably more likely to manage that more effectively than they might manage somebody whose behavior they don't understand. And it hasn't been made clear that this is what the difference is. They're Japanese, they're German, they're got a neurodiversity. How would you advise chairs to watch themselves, look out at what they're doing, pick up that bias that they are delivering, and correct themselves? What advice would you give? For a start,
I would advise all chairs to get mediation training. That's the first. So I'm a trained mediator myself. When you learn to mediate, the first skill you learn is to listen. And I think a lot of business people can benefit from that. I mean, I talk too much sometimes for sure, but having worked as a chair for 15 years on different companies now, the listening is much more important than the standing back. For example, I would generally never offer my opinion on an issue until everyone else has spoken. And I would go around the board and ask every single person, what do you think of this on key issues? When you're having strategic changes or something that is key, I mean, everything you discuss in boardroom, of course, is key, but sometimes things can flow a bit more freely, but with key issues, everyone needs a voice. And if the chair starts with their own opinion, they have already taken out at least half of the board because they're just going to lean into that opinion. So
you probably have taken out 99% of the board except themselves.
I was being kind to board members. So I think this is very, very important to actually ensure that you stand back as a chair. And on the boards that I chair, I'm very, very consensus driven. I like to always come, but that's a mediator's job as well, is to have people on two different mountaintops to come together in agreement on something. You take people on an emotional journey and you end up, and sometimes it takes longer or shorter, and then it's up to how patient you can be with change when change is needed. If it's that, and again, in turn, that depends on the urgency of the change that's needed. And obviously, as someone who thinks constantly about the sort of handful of things, for me, sometimes I have done a lot more thinking than a lot of other board members would do on specific issues in specific companies. I would also have gone to much more lengths to speak to all stakeholders, employees at all levels in the organization, sub-providers, whatever it might be. And therefore maybe had reached a conclusion that I really need to see come through, but the other board members haven't reached that yet. So you have to take them on an emotional journey, the journey that you've been on yourself to then bring that. So I think as chairs, if you don't, a dominant chair is a bad chair. Dominant chairs does not work. It's not acceptable to be dominant when you're a chair. You are there to bring everyone's voices to the table. That is all you're there to bring people's voices to the table, everybody's voices. You are there to have an interest in human beings and understand how you bring out people's voices best. and how you end up at consensus. And in the rare occasions where you need a vote, that you have the courage to take the vote. I mean, in 17 years of being on boards, we haven't taken a vote ever. It has never been necessary. We have come on the boards I work on, we have come to a place where everybody can live. And there was not true, there was one case where we wanted to follow the UN investment principles, and we had a director who felt that the UN was corrupt and had a real issue with the UN, so would not stand behind that decision that the majority of the board had taken, and said to me, I want in the minutes that I'm not in agreement. I said, we can put it in the minutes, but that does not take you away from having to stand behind this decision, because we have collective responsibility. If you truly don't feel you can do that, I would expect you to step off the board. And so he stepped off the board, and I said, I accept your resignation. And we should all do that. We should not be in a board if decisions are made that we can't stand behind, because we could be in court one day having to stand behind it. And there is no excuse. There's no excuse if you stay there and just say, I didn't agree. It doesn't count. Collective responsibility as directors through and through. And some people don't understand that well.
The way I look at it, when you look at somebody who doesn't feel the same way as the majority, it may or may not be minuted, it may or may not be known fully, but I do see that person, if I were a chair or a colleague, they are my best risk antennae to look out for the company if things if they actually were right and things start to show their mettle. So my view is you turn as a chair and you say, help us stay on the straight and narrow, help us be mindful of the risks. The other thing you said about the chair not having the degree of voice or the degree of debate until a later point, the other correlation I put to is to the conductor of an orchestra. They do not have the violin or the trombone in their hand. They've got a baton.
But they bring everyone together.
But they're bringing everyone together to create a symphony.
Which is an absolute key role.
I mean, you can't do it without the conductor.
But some chairs actually do go over and just make decisions on behalf of the entire board without the board. And that's not good business.
No, and I think the important thing that what you're doing in the world and what we are all doing in the well-being space that we've learned since COVID is to recognize the differences that people bring to the equation and to respect them. But I think your point 100% is to listen, but also to understand, get to know your directors, talk to them, talk to your colleague, your co-directors. We all need to understand one another, because otherwise
it's a team, but it's a team that has to also differ in opinions. And that's why the conductor piece of it comes in, because you've got to get the harmony going eventually once you have taken the journey through differences, and hopefully everybody has learned. And then you come to a place where everyone is happy. Also, everyone should be mature enough to understand that compromise means that maybe not everyone is happy, but everyone can live in it. But maybe a true compromise means everyone is a little bit unhappy, but they can live in it, right? If there's one happy and one not happy and they compromise, that's not a compromise. That could just be bullying your way through and getting someone to agree.
Coming somewhere to the middle, that you come out of a board meeting feeling I added value. They say you want to kill somebody, which can sometimes get in the way of your long-term health and future. If you were to write a job spec and you were looking for somebody who was neurodiverse, or a neurodiverse person was looking at job specs, what's the kind of wording, things that might be said in the job spec? Let's look particularly at a board director. What might they pick up and say, that's my skill set, that's me?
So I think, I'm all for very open director sort of specs, job specs, because you never know what someone can bring until you see the person. And the more specific you make it, the more specific people you get to apply. And obviously the words you use are super important. If you're truly looking for cognitive difference, which I expect people do when they think neurodiversity, it's actually the cognitively different way of thinking that they're looking for. That should be said. It should be said that we are looking for people who are happy to disagree.
Yes.
Because most neurodivergent people are.
Quite relaxed.
In fact, the thing is, we can't even help it. We can't help it. It is what it is, right? We can't help speaking up. And we do that as children. I mean, I spoke to someone, his daughter was like saying to the teacher, "You're not a good teacher." And the teacher got so upset. I mean, in the end, they wanted to expel her. She hadn't beaten anyone up. She hadn't been violent, she hadn't done anything. But she had spoken back to the teachers and they couldn't tolerate that.
Interesting.
So she had to leave the school.
Made it too uncomfortable for her.
Well, there's been quite a lot of that. I mean, she happened to be highly intelligent and just saw through the fact that the teacher probably knew less than her. I mean, we had another experience with a 13-year-old boy, again, that didn't fit into the schools, but he had a huge interest in meteorology, the weather, and so much so that he went to a summer school at a university. And after 3 weeks in that summer school, they asked him, would he be an assistant teacher in meteorology, because his knowledge was just way beyond anything else they had ever seen and met. So he was then, after that, alongside his other education. And these are the kind of talents we lose out on, right? So, but they wouldn't be able to not disagree sometimes because the knowledge is deep in a number of areas. But disagreeing isn't welcomed when you are a child, but it should be welcomed in the boardroom. So actually, I would like to see more job descriptions for board positions say, we are looking for people comfortable to disagree, and actually live that culture, try to have that culture, as opposed to looking at the director who disagree a lot as an issue, as a problem, as an irritant. You look at that person as a necessary part of any well-functioning board.
Mm-hmm. And we've got quite a few questions coming in, and there's one talking about if we looked at cognitive diversity on the board, using the word benign subversives. Now, this might mean something to you, but it means absolutely nothing to me.
I'm not sure it means so much, but I think I can guess what it might mean.
And they're also talking about where somebody can be able to see the gaps in things, be able to see the failures in things, being able to see the path through a complex issue. Yeah. And maybe that's what makes you scary.
I think it is because it's strange. I've always spoken to my children about the gaps. I said, you have to look at the gaps. Actually, it's a standing joke in our family that I always talk about the gaps, but it's the gaps that matter. It's why you see, here's something that everybody wants, but nobody's delivering that. So so fill those gaps and you will successfully be doing whatever you do, no matter what it is, to try to do something that someone else is already doing really well. Exactly. What are you really adding? Why are you trying to compete? Do you have something specific? So I think that is very valid to say, seeing the gaps, or, for example, recognizing patterns that other people don't recognize can actually be a real strength. Because there are patterns everywhere in people's behaviors, in organizational, strategies, and everything has patterns. And the more you learn, the more you see these patterns absolutely everywhere. Certainly I do, but my mind is very pattern driven. So those words would also be helpful, I think, to put in. I'm not sure can we have an explanation on the subversive?
Benign subversive. So maybe we could get that up on the chat as to what you are referring to. But in the meantime, we are running out of time. What I'd like you to tell us now and share with us is, so what are you doing about it, other than chatting here with me, about bringing this knowledge to the value of corporate citizens, to families? And I have to say, your children are extremely lucky to have a mum like you, who instinctively, I'm sure they don't, kids never do, but instinctively you knew how to deal with them, even though you didn't know your own condition at that time, but you had the respect for your children to be able to look after them in the way you needed to. Now, many parents are not going to be able to achieve that. Many chairs are not going to achieve that. Many bosses are not going to be able to achieve that. So how do we get this we understand cultural difference. How are we going to get this neurodiversity understanding commonplace in the world as it should be?
Yeah.
What are you doing?
So here's one of the gaps, right? So that's what I saw. I saw one of the gaps. And one of the gaps is that for some reason, no one has ever anywhere tried to bring all of us together. So all of the neurodivergent people come together and talk to each other, learn from each other's experiences, find solutions together that are universal solutions that not only benefits us, but benefits the broader humanity. Solutions where the world is built up not just for the middle, but for the much broader group of diversities within humanity. That way we can draw out much more talent and different thinking. So I launched the Institute of Neurodiversity a year ago with a group of other neurodivergent people who came to me after I went very public in the UK around being autistic, which was extremely scary because I wasn't sure how much I would get discriminated against. I was acutely aware that it could cost me my business. It was certainly not going to give me more business. Mm-hmm. It hasn't seemed to ring true. I seem to be still okay. I'm still getting approached for board positions. So yeah, but now we have this open conversation about it. But so we launched it as a Swiss company because we have a number of big companies, global companies supporting us. And they said, you should choose a neutral country to launch this organization. So the central support center, if you want, is Switzerland. That's where we hold sort of the branding and the principles of what we do. And now we're setting up in 14 different countries currently. We have 3 entities in the US, in the UK, in Switzerland, in France. That's 4 so far.
Please, you worked that one out.
That's not for profit. So, but the Swiss one, I wasn't really thinking because that's a central support center, but in terms of countries. And then we have another 11 countries working to set up with steering groups in. So India, Pakistan, Brazil, Australia, Germany, Ireland, Canada, Denmark. So quite broadly spread out across the world. And our aim is to be in 100 countries with 1 million members by the end of 2025, which is obviously a massive ambition. And this is one of my weaknesses. I can only do big ambitions.
So I ask a question as the last question, because we are now over time. Which is in Africa? Which of your 14 countries in Africa? I didn't hear any, to the best of my knowledge.
So Africa is interesting, of course. I have reached out. What we have said is we need to be led by neurodivergent people. Yes. It is very hard to find African neurodivergent people who are prepared to be open about it when in Africa. We have up here, but within Africa, there is a lot of stigma. There is also in India. I was speaking to the Indian steering group, and they said when you are diagnosed autistic in India, you get classified as retarded, was the word they used. Wow. So they said, we really need a global institute behind us to bring this out in India. And in Africa, it's again, the narrative is so damaging that no one would dare speaking openly, but we're working on that. So hopefully when we broaden it out in as many other countries and get the country leaders in this, which are all neurodivergent people standing up, talking about themselves.
And senior leaders. That's right.
We need the senior leaders. If you call yourself a leader and you're neurodivergent and you're too scared to be vulnerable with that, maybe you need to look at your leadership style more, because as leaders, we have to do that to allow other people to do the same.
Yes, and that's how we're going to get our role models, how the world is going to become a better place for all of us to live comfortably, respectfully. We don't have to love everybody, but we do need to be able to trust people and to be able to respect them and to be able to work with them and therefore to understand them. So that is so critically important. My goodness, we could honestly go on for another hour, but always stop something at the top. Thank you very much for telling us where you're going to, Charlotte, in terms of your mission and your projects. Really, really wonderful. And looking forward to seeing you again in person sometime soon.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And to everybody else who's with us today, thank you very much for joining us. It's been a really wonderful hour for me. Obviously, that's much easier. I hope for all of you that you have learned something, which I have done today. And Charlotte, your insights are amazingly forthright, clear, absolute clarity. Isn't that what a neurodivergent person shares with us, which you've done extremely well? Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
For having me.
Thanks.